Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Godzilla series with Godzilla's Revenge, a.k.a. All Monsters Attack. Now, this came out in 1969, and this is the 10th film in the Godzilla franchise. The film is once again directed by Ishiro Honda, who directed the original Godzilla film and directed several of the Godzilla sequels. And the film is once again written by Shinichi Sekizawa, who was pretty much Toho's main writer for these Godzilla films during this period. He didn't write the first two Godzilla films, and he didn't write Destroy All Monsters, but he wrote pretty much all of the other ones leading up to this. Now, the previous Godzilla film, Destroy All Monsters, was meant to be the final film in the franchise, but it proved successful enough for Toho to continue the series. Now, Godzilla's Revenge is a bit of a controversial one for a lot of Godzilla fans, with many considering it to be the worst in the franchise. Not an entirely undeserved reputation either. And I used to be in that grouping, but after rewatching it the other night, I still don't like the movie, but I can at least see what Ishiro Honda and Shinichi Sekizawa were going for with this. I still think the movie overall is a failure, but I do think they were trying to make this a better film than it is. Now, a huge point of contention among fans with this movie is that, in a lot of ways, it's basically a glorified clip show. The movie uses a lot of stock footage from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster and Son of Godzilla. It also uses some footage from Destroy All Monsters and some footage from This Isn't a Godzilla Movie, but King Kong Escapes. With some original Godzilla footage, and with this whole story involving a little boy to tie all the footage together. Now, the fact that the main character is a little kid, you can definitely see the influence of the Gamera series on this movie. Now, unlike the Godzilla series, which started out more for adults, but ultimately got geared more towards children, the Gamera series, pretty much from the beginning, was always really geared towards children, and almost all of them featured little kid characters. But if this movie is influenced by the Gamera series, that's also really ironic, considering that Gamera was a ripoff of Godzilla. Now, in a lot of ways, this is not properly a Godzilla movie. It's really a coming-of-age children's film that just happens to feature Godzilla, and if you look at the movie that way, it's maybe a little more palatable, but it's still not a very good movie. Now, before I get into the plot of this movie, it's worth stating that every time Godzilla or Minilla or any of the other monsters show up in this movie, it's only in the main character's head, leaving many people to believe that this is actually taking place outside of the traditional Godzilla continuity. Like, it seems like the movie is taking place in the real world where Godzilla is just a fictional character and the main character happens to be a big Godzilla fan, so he imagines himself with Godzilla. Now, the plot of Godzilla's Revenge is it's about a little boy named Ishiro who is pretty much on his own most of the time. Both of his parents work, so there's really nobody to watch over him, with the exception of an older neighbor who really is more just a friend to him rather than a father figure. And he's constantly bullied by this group of kids led by a boy named Gabra. But Ishiro finds solace in daydreams where he imagines himself on Monster Island with Godzilla's son Minilla, who in his dreams can talk and can also increase and decrease his size. And Minilla is being bullied by a monster called Gabra, and Godzilla has to defend him from Gabra and the other monsters on Monster Island, while also trying to teach Minilla how to stand up for himself. Meanwhile, in the real world, Ishiro ends up getting kidnapped by these bank robbers because one of them stupidly dropped their driver's license and Ishiro found it. So Ishiro has to fight off these bank robbers using the lessons he learned on Monster Island, and then ultimately at the end of the film stands up to the real-life Gabra. Now, that plot description alone should tell you that, for better or worse, this is not your typical Godzilla movie at all. Now, to the film's credit, there actually is some subtext to the film. Really, when you break it down, this is the story of a boy trying to escape the harsh realities of his world by going into this fantasy world. And there's a lot of themes in this movie about fatherhood, but also about the breakdown of the family unit. And I remember hearing somewhere that Ishiro Honda was kind of trying to make a critique of where Japan was at economically at the time, where Ishiro's parents, while they're certainly not unloving, they both have to work to support themselves and Ichiro, and as a result, they're really not there for him as much as maybe they should be, or maybe they want to be. And there actually is a moment at the end of the movie, after Ichiro is saved from the kidnappers, where he's talking with his mother, and you could tell that his mother kind of feels like she failed as a mother because she wasn't there for her child, but Ichiro forgives her because he realizes she was working at the time and she has to work, and she actually wipes her eyes crying a little bit, and that moment, that was actually a genuinely emotionally moving moment, and it was honestly a moment that was too good for the rest of the movie. Because subtext aside, this movie sucks. Because ultimately the film is too goofy and silly for its own good. Now I understand that was the point because this is a kid's film, but looking at the subtext, I honestly think the film could have benefited from being a little bit darker. Like, still keep it a kid's film, but maybe do something where maybe the parents recently had a divorce, or maybe one of the parents recently died. Something to make, like, him escaping to Monster Island a little more potent. And the two bumbling bank robbers who kidnap Ichiro, I understand the point was they were supposed to be incompetent because they were meant to be kind of comedic in the film, but at no point in the movie did I believe these guys were actually a threat to this kid, who is a little kid. Now, as a standalone film, you could argue that maybe it's not terrible, but as a Godzilla film, it fails on every conceivable level. Admittedly, some of the original footage of Godzilla fighting Gabra isn't too bad, and I actually don't mind Gabra as a monster, even though he completely exists inside Ichiro's head. But all the stuff of Ichiro having conversations with the miniature version of Minya is pretty freaking cringeworthy, especially if you watch the dubbed version of this movie. Now, to defend the film's usage of stock footage a little bit, one, you gotta take into account that the film had an extremely low budget. But if you consider that the movie is not really taking place in the Godzilla universe, but is more or less taking place in our world, the usage of stock footage actually kind of makes sense because Ichiro's probably seen a lot of these movies, and he's remembering whole scenes from those movies. So, maybe you could say, and I'm probably giving the film way more credit than it deserves, but you could say that maybe this is sort of a metafiction rumination on how the Godzilla franchise was appealing to children at this point. So, overall, I don't hate the movie as much as I used to. I still think the film is pretty bad, but there are some things that I do appreciate about it. I mean, I'll say this about the movie, you can't really say there are too many other Godzilla films like it, but maybe the ultimate lesson is unique doesn't always mean good. Now, this movie did set the template for the rest of the Showa Godzilla series, where pretty much all the 70s Godzilla films were exclusively made for children. Now, it's ironic that this movie was inspired by the Gamera movies, not just because the Gamera series was a ripoff of Godzilla, but also because later on there was a Gamera movie called Gamera Super Monster that was very similar to this in the sense that it was basically just a clip show showing clips from all the older Gamera movies. Now, before I end this video, I want to cut to two short reviews. One is from The Lobster, who appeared in my Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster review. This time I managed to get a little more out of him, so here is Mr. Lobster's thoughts on Godzilla's Revenge, because Ebera shows up in the movie, so I wanted to get his thoughts on this movie.
Well, it's okay.
And now here's my friend Christian Feliciano giving his thoughts on Godzilla's Revenge.
For my short review, I really thought about just going, Godzilla's Revenge is a piece of shit. Credits. But I guess I should explain why. And wow, talk about a movie that really pisses me off. I really hate this movie. And I forgot all about it until I was watching it again, just looking over them. Pretty much just kind of, for these reviews, I was kind of just looking over them again just to kind of refresh my memory of them and stuff like that. And I was and I'm like, oh God, I hate this film. I really do. It's a little boy having dreams and Godzilla's in the dreams. And then it's a bullying message and I'm like, what the fuck is this? It's a terrible freaking film. It just really is bad. It's extremely, I don't even know what. It doesn't lead to nothing. There's no point. You know, I'd rather take a lobster again. If we're going to talk about, you know, just fun. I'd rather just have a lobster show up in this freaking film than just have this, you know, what's going on in this film. It just makes no sense why this exists. It felt like they had a quota, or they had a, you know, either a quota to fill in for the amount of films they had to do with the character Godzilla, or it feels like they had a deadline and they had no script and somebody was just like, yo, write a script. And they got the dumbest guy in the room to just grab a pen and said, oh, I can do a script. And he wrote his script and there you have it. This film popped out of his ass. I mean, he must have dug deep into his ass to pull this film out because what the hell? Why does this even exist? This is terrible. I hate this film. I really do. This is like the Phantom Menace of Star Wars. I mean, of Godzilla. I really can't stand this film. What were they thinking?
Wait a minute. This just occurred to me. This movie's about a child going into a fantasy world filled with monsters to escape the harsh realities of the real world. Guillermo del Toro was a huge Godzilla fan. Holy shit! Pan's Labyrinth is a ripoff of Godzilla's Revenge!